Previously on the Skip and Josh Sports Show.
I should never.
The throwing motion is a very unnatural thing.
It hurts to throw a ball. It just hurts to throw a ball.
Well, you know what I always used to say when we used to play together. You're like, "Do you want to warm up?" I'm like, "No. If I warm up, I won't be able to throw during the game."
You only have a certain number of throws in your
I had
arm.
like 3 good throws in me, and if I burn those in the warm up, then that was it.
The Skip and Josh Sports Show is on now.
Skippy,
Hey, what's up?
how's it going?
It's going great. It's great to talk to you on a Wednesday.
It is. So I just want to remind all our previous listeners and tell all our new listeners that I'm in Toronto and you're in Montreal.
Yep.
We do this show weekly, and we record it via Skype, and obviously we're not able to see each other. So it sometimes makes things a little bit complicated because you don't know when I'm finished a thought, and I don't know when you're finished a thought, and we interrupt each other quite a bit.
Me interrupting you more.
Okay, I'll accept that.
You'll accept that.
So anyway, so now that we got that out of the way, this episode is basically going to recap the NHL and NBA seasons because both of them are now done.
That's it.
So I want to start with the NBA, and I have a few questions for you.
Sure. Shoot them at me.
So I guess in no particular order.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, do you agree with Kevin Durant being named the MVP of the finals?
Yes. How is that even a question? I mean, it's the biggest no-brainer ever. He was completely dominant. He said in an interview it's the best 5 games he's ever played in a row. And there's no way they could have given it to anyone else. The only person they could have actually given it to was LeBron. But I mean,
that was what I was going to ask you, actually.
I mean, yeah, of course. If you really go by the strictest sense of the word, who was the most valuable player among the two teams in the series? It is LeBron, because without LeBron, they are completely useless. That team, they wouldn't even win any games. But no, Kevin Durant's the MVP of the series for sure.
And so, sticking with Durant for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on a player of his caliber who was a free agent who could have gone to any team and he decides to go to the best team? I know this topic has been talked about for months.
Yeah. It's a hard question, and it's not something that's easy to say, right away when he signed last year, everyone was like, it was black or white. Either you hated Durant and you thought he was a scumbag for doing that, greedy, selfish, taking the easy way. You heard everything about him, right? You heard everything. And then there wasn't as many people basically saying, look, let him do what he wants. Like, I'm in the camp that's, if he's out there, they can afford him. There's a salary cap, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a salary cap. You can't just pay anybody. You can't just pay 12 guys $25 million each on your team, They have to fit him into their salary structure. And they did, and, they sacrificed a little bit of bench players, but obviously it wasn't, and as obviously they didn't have the same impact that he does. So, if I'm Kevin Durant, I'm all for it. You could do whatever you want to do, and that's what he did. That's what being a free agent is, right? You have the right to pick your team. The team chose him, he chose them, and then he signed there. And just to follow up on this, so, I don't know if you saw the interview with LeBron James after the last game.
I didn't see it.
Okay, so they asked him, what's it like playing against a super team? So, now they've branded the Warriors as a super team, almost as a way to say it's unfair, right? It goes into the same story as it's unfair that they're so good. And he said, I don't know. I don't know what it's like to play on a super team. I'm telling you, I almost fell off my chair because that is the biggest crock I've ever heard in my life. This guy, LeBron James, invented the super team. He's the creator of the super team. Do you remember him when he signed with the Heat with Bosch and
Wade?
Dwayne Wade was already there, but they all teamed up. They had a big party in the arena in Miami. There was it was like a concert.
Mm-hmm.
They came out. Everybody knows it. We're gonna win, not 2, not 3, not whatever. Talking about all the championships they're gonna win and everything, and he invented the super team. He's the first one to do this.
So let me ask you then, speaking of super teams, but other people call them dynasties sometimes.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on dynasties in sports in general? Is it good when one team is so dominant and wins, maybe not 4 years in a row or 5 years in a row, but 3 out of 6 years? Or is it better when it gets spread around and there's parity?
Well, it's also a difficult question, and I know we don't have the same opinion on this because we talked about this over the years, right? Of course, like when the Expos were here, for instance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you say, oh my God, it's so unfair because how can they compete with these other teams? And of course, as an Expo fan, you hate it. You hate the dynasties. You hate the big market teams because they have an unfair advantage. The Jays, for instance, all those years playing in the American League East with the Yankees and the Red Sox, basically like having like an escalation of nuclear arms, with their salaries, build up and build up and build up, both teams getting crazy strong, and the Jays trying to get by, right? So they can't compete either. So I do feel for the fans of the different teams, because there's an unfair advantage, but I feel that for a league as a whole, there's nothing wrong with a dynasty. A dynasty creates a villain. A dynasty creates someone to cheer for or for everybody else to cheer against. So, look, we're going to see a dynasty, right? The Warriors are basically should be in contention for the next 5 years at least.
Mm-hmm.
And the Cavs, as long as LeBron is playing, I don't know if anyone can dethrone them. So we may see the Warriors Cavs for the next 3 or 4 years in the NBA Finals, right?
Right, but it looks like unless the Cavs do something in the offseason, it looks like the Warriors are going to beat the Cavs every year. So as good as the Cavs are in the East,
yeah,
the Warriors are that much better.
But things change over time,
Of
know.
course,
So
of course.
yeah, maybe next year Golden State will have the same team, and maybe Cleveland will go out and get someone to improve. I don't know what, but let's say they do. And then what happens the year after that? It's so weird that I don't want to start talking about 2-3 years from now. There's so many things that could happen, right? But what if then Steph Curry has to have his contract renewed, so they got to pay him $1 bajillion. Then maybe they can't afford to sign Klay Thompson, or maybe they can't afford to sign Draymond Green. Maybe Draymond Green one day says, you know what, I'm the 4th guy on this team, I could be number 1 on another team, so he wants to go somewhere else after they won a couple of championships, right? So there are ways that the teams could change, right? And teams pick up other players in the draft, and I'm talking about weird scenarios, and chances are it is going to be Golden State Cleveland for the next few years. And look, were the NBA playoffs great this year? No. The playoffs were not great. Were the finals great? No, they weren't that great, but that's because one team was so good. But I mean, I think if it's the Warriors Cavs again in the finals next year, they're going to get great ratings. The ratings are going to be through the roof, and they're going to hype it up like crazy. In the 80s, you had the Celtics and the Lakers in the finals practically every year. No one complains. No one complained. Maybe people complained about it then if you were a fan of the Milwaukee Bucks or the Sixers or the Dallas Mavericks or whatever. But now looking back at it 25 years later, it's like the romanticized Celtics Lakers. We talked about it. There's a 30 for 30, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you look back at it now, you say, what a great era, the Celtics Lakers era, So maybe we'll look back at this in 20 years from now and we'll see it was the Cavs Warriors era. What a great rivalry. And they'll do 30 for 30s on LeBron versus Durant, and what a great rivalry they had.
So I do have a few more questions for you, but I just want to chime in with my opinion for a second here.
Yeah, sure. I know that you like the competitive balance.
I prefer the competitive balance, and for the simple reason that, I mean, sure, if you're a fan of the Warriors, you're thrilled. And maybe if you're a fan of the Cavaliers, you might also be thrilled. But if you're a fan of any of the other 28 teams in the league, you're sitting there saying, for example, if you're a fan of the Raptors, we can't even get out of our own conference. Forget about winning a championship. And if you're a fan of, I don't know, the Houston Rockets or the LA Clippers or even the San Antonio Spurs, who have had some great success recently, you're thinking, how are we going to get out of our own conference, let alone win a championship? And so the way that sports works, the way that sports operates, and the reason fans come to games, whatever league it is because there's always the chance that their team is going to win it all. And so if you take away all hope from these fans, then why are they going to show up?
Good points. I can't dispute any of that. And like I said, when I was a fan of a specific team, I didn't like the big boy on the block, right? But all I'm saying is that from a league standpoint, looking at it from the top of the league, the highest point, I don't think a dynasty is a bad thing. That's all I'm saying.
You're not wrong. And so, for example, yes, if if you're not a fan of Golden State or Cleveland, you probably still watched the NBA Finals, even though you're not a fan.
Well,
of
because
either
the
team.
thing is, how many teams are there in the league? 30 teams?
Yes.
Okay, so 28 teams have been eliminated, right? So the fans of 28 teams now are looking for someone else to root for. So chances are everybody was rooting for Cleveland and only the people in San Francisco are rooting for Golden State, you know?
Right.
That's kind of the way it goes. But when you do have a dynasty like this, like I said, it creates a villain, right? It creates a hero and a villain. And the league likes that story, right? That's a good story to sell.
You're right. However, usually, other than the NFL, usually when your team gets eliminated, you stop following that league.
Yeah.
Usually.
That does happen, yes. I mean, I know what happens for me in hockey, right? I don't often.
If your hockey team gets eliminated,
Yeah.
you stop watching. Your baseball team gets eliminated, you stop watching, so on and so forth. Now, I think that the only reason people continue to watch the NBA Finals, if they weren't Golden State or Cleveland fans, are because, it's the third time they're meeting each other and everyone wants to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, it was the anticipation
Right.
of those two teams meeting, right?
So,
Yeah.
so on a league level, you're not wrong. However, if you took all the fans of the NBA in the entire United States and Canada, I think 90% of them would say they don't like dynasties.
Right.
10%.
I think you're probably right.
So
But what I'm saying is I think the networks like it.
you're probably right. So let's
You know?
let's stick with basketball, but go
Sure.
back to let's go back to game 5 itself.
Sure.
I watched a bit of it. I'm assuming
Yeah.
you watched more than I did.
Yeah, I just missed like the first 5 minutes.
It
but-
appeared to me, the parts that I watched, that neither team was playing defense.
Well, that was the whole series, right? I don't have the scores in front of me, but there was they scored like 60 something points in the half, like sometimes the teams, right? There was very little defense, and these are regarded as two of the better defensive teams in the league, but I think it's the offenses are so good, and there's the shooting is so good now in the NBA. The ball handling is just ridiculous. Like, it's so hard to defend guys one-on-one, right? So I don't know why there was such high scoring, but we saw some incredible basketball. The pace of those games, I mean, like literally the sheer speed of the games, right? Back and forth, and it was mind-boggling,
Yeah, each team had a lot of possessions.
You have two of the best one-on-one players on each team, LeBron and Durant, guys that basically are unguardable when they want to take the ball to the basket. You have two of literally the first and second best ball handlers in terms of dribbling skills in Curry and Irving.
Mm-hmm.
You have a guy in Irving that could finish around the rim, like he could take a shot with his foot, with blindfold, and it would go in sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Like he takes shots around the rim that look like they're impossible, and somehow they just go in. Like, so, and you have sharpshooters on either team. You have Klay Thompson, and then on the other side, yesterday you saw J.R. Smith, who, when he heats up, is just out of control. He doesn't miss. And the 3-point games definitely revolutionized basketball. The game's all about 3-pointers, right? So that's partly why the scores are so high, because the shooting is so good. But yeah, there didn't appear to be a lot of defense.
So this could be my last question, but what are there any free agents out there that Cleveland can sign that could help them defeat the Warriors next year?
Well, there's always free agents, and I mean, I'm not 100% sure who's out there, to be honest. I think they're at a bit of a crossroads in that, look, I'm sure they love their big two in Irving and LeBron, right? I think that's safe to say is like that's not going anywhere. I think they like Tristan Thompson, what he brings, although he was very inconsistent in this series.
He was invisible.
But I think the position where they really need to improve is where Kevin Love is. He really doesn't give them anything anymore. My son pointed something out yesterday when he was watching it, because you see Kevin Love now, he's like skinny, right? He's on this vegan diet or whatever he's on. He's the svelte Kevin Love.
Okay.
And Matthew said yesterday, he goes, you know what? Kevin Love was better when he was fat, because he had power. Right now, he's just like a 6'10" guy who could hit threes sometimes, right? But he doesn't do enough other than, there's everybody in the league could hit threes now, right? So he's not bringing anything special, right? There's plenty of big men who could hit threes. Every team has one. So I think it's that position that they may look to move away from Love and onto something else.
Okay.
That's where I see Cleveland possibly improving. And obviously, I mean, look, the backup point guard position was a complete disaster. Anytime Deron Williams was on the floor, it was completely wasted minutes. Even if he only played 10 minutes a game, that's 10 minutes too much. So they needed to go out and get like a legit backup point guard, any guard that could come in and do play like proper minutes. Because you see what happened. Cleveland shortened their bench, right? Cleveland shortened their bench in the last few games,
and they were exhausted,
especially the last game. And you know the big reason everyone gets on LeBron's case. They say he doesn't take charge in the fourth quarter. He doesn't take enough shots. You know why he doesn't take enough shots? He's freaking exhausted.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He can't. He's so gassed. He is so exhausted by the time he gets to the last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter. He's not the normal LeBron, right? And now he's only going to get a year older, and then a year older, so it's not going to get any better. So they do have Kyrie, who is clearly like a legit, scorer, right? I don't know if he's a great point guard. I don't know if he's a great defensive player, but he can certainly score. So they have that. Their bench is not great. Like you saw in the last game, they didn't get any production from their bench at all. Whereas Golden State has all kinds of guys coming off the bench. David West, Sean Livingston. These are good players, right? They had this rookie McCaw all of a sudden coming in and making shots, right? Like Cleveland would have loved to have a guy like McCaw, right, to come in and play 7 minutes and score 5 points or whatever it was, right? So I think that's where they can improve. But like you said, Golden State is just, they're juggernauts.
Well, I mean, they were arguably the best team of all time last year when they won 73 games.
And they could have, they should have and would have beat the Cavs last year without Durant.
Right.
Only because Green got suspended, Curry was hurt, and it still took Cleveland 7 games to beat them.
And an insane performance by LeBron James in the last 3 games.
Well, I mean, you always expect an insane performance by LeBron James is becoming like ordinary now, right? It's the norm. He's so good, it's ridiculous.
And so just to finish my thought, so they were arguably the best team of all time, and then they added one of the top 5 players in the league. And this is we were talking about free agency earlier, and dynasties. See, this is what I don't like. I think free agency has ruined sports, not just basketball.
It has to a certain extent,
because the whole idea of the draft is that the weaker teams get the higher picks. They get to improve their teams so that in a perfect world, the weaker teams get better and the better teams get weaker.
Right.
And that's what's supposed to happen. So when you have a system in place, and every league has this, where, the best team in the league can go out one off season and go and sign the best player that's available.
Yeah.
I mean, then there's just no balance.
In the NBA, it's worse. The free agency situation is worse because the way the contracts work, you heard it before, they say we're going to give them a max contract. There is a maximum number of dollars a team can offer. So when you are a free agent, example, Kevin Durant, whatever, I don't know what his salary is. I couldn't tell you exactly offhand what his salary is. Mm-hmm. But whatever Golden State is paying him, every other team in the league could pay him the same amount. Like, no one can pay more.
Right.
It's not like Milwaukee can come in and say, we're going to give you $5 million more. They can't. In fact,
I think the team that he's on is able to give him a little bit more than any other team in the league. So therefore, it's in his best interest, if he wants more money, to stay with the team he's on. I think
the only team that could have gave him more was Oklahoma City. They could have offered more. There's like that's the incentive for teams to keep their players, right?
Right.
So the incumbent team, so to speak, can give more. But why would a free agent go to Milwaukee? Why would a free agent go to Sacramento?
Well, this is why I don't think there should be free agency at all.
Right. The only incentive.
And the other reason, by the way, free agency has so much bigger impact in the NBA than the other leagues is, first of all, there's only 5 guys on the floor.
Oh, of course, one player makes such a big influence.
And you only have 14 guys on the roster.
Right.
Hockey, you've got 20, 25 guys. Baseball, you've got 25 guys. Football, you've got 50-something guys. So one player makes a huge difference on a basketball team.
Right.
So when you're the best team in the league and you go and sign the best player in the league or one of the top 3 guys in the league, then obviously you're going to be good.
Right. But, like in the NHL, for instance, the Buffalo Sabres could offer a free agent a boatload of money and maybe get him to come.
Well, the thing is, it's the salary cap's different in the NHL because it's a hard cap. In basketball, I don't think it's a hard cap. If you go over, you can go over. You just have to pay the fine.
But what I'm trying to say is that like a small market team could offer a player a lot of money to come, whereas in the NBA, the small market teams can only offer the same amount of money as all the other teams.
Right.
So there's no incentive, like that's why free agents go to San Antonio. They want to play for Popovich. There needs to be some other reason for players to want to come, and obviously Durant found his reason. He wanted to win the championship, right? So I give him credit. He wanted to win the championship.
I think free agency is bad for yet another reason, because as you said, owners with deep pockets can open up their wallets and offer all this money. But you don't understand. The owners are killing themselves. They're shooting themselves in the foot because they get into these bidding wars and with
themselves.
Yeah. And so you end up driving up the market. And so a guy who, I don't know, let's say he's worth $1 million. I'm just making up a round number here. Is going to end up getting 2 or 3 or 4 million just because there's 3 or 4 teams that want him and they all bid against each other to get him.
There's nothing that's going to change it.
No.
You know what could change all the free agency? And it may come in the next 5-ish years. The TV money dries up.
Right.
So right now the NBA is in a boom because they signed a humongous TV deal, right? So all the salaries went up last year. And that deal's going to last for a little while. But in the other leagues, we've talked about it a few episodes ago, right? ESPN laid off a whole bunch of people. Subscribers, ESPN's losing money like they can't even count how much money they're losing. They're losing money so fast. So, the next contract for the NFL, maybe it's not going to be as big, the next TV contract. After this contract with the NBA, maybe it's not going to be as big. ESPN's not going to be able to offer the bajillion dollars that they did. We'll see. I guess we'll see. It's funny because we're talking about free agents. The last point about, I have nothing more to say about the NBA Finals, but I can just talk about free agency for a little bit. Do you remember when we were young?
Actually, I don't remember. It's too long ago.
Yeah, too long ago. The first free agent that I remember, there's 2 guys that I remember that got big contracts. And it was Reggie Jackson when he went to the Yankees. And then it was Dave Winfield when he went to the Yankees. It was more Dave Winfield that I remember the most because it was like early 80s. And they signed him for like $1 million a year and everyone was freaking out, right? Then like 2 years later, the Expos had to sign Gary Carter and they signed him for $1 million a year, right?
Yeah.
And you know it as well as me. The owner of the Expos, Charles Bronfman, is like, I cannot pay a player $1 million a season.
Yeah.
He couldn't fathom it.
Yeah.
And that's why Carter got traded, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now $1 million is the minimum salary.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. So that's it for the NBA. We'll look forward to next season. Like you said, who can challenge the Warriors? I don't know if anybody can challenge them, but that's why they have the draft. The Celtics, look, the Celtics are in a great position because they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, and they have the first overall pick.
You know what would have been interesting? Obviously, we'll never find this out. If Kevin Durant had signed with Cleveland instead of Golden State and they faced each other, that would have been interesting.
Well, that would be more ridiculous. How could you have LeBron and Durant on the same team? That's craziness.
Yeah, but Golden State was still a sick team without Durant. You said it yourself.
I know, but you know what? Sometimes you load up with players. It doesn't always work. They had Durant and Westbrook. They couldn't win with them. So you have to play the games. But I mean, the Warriors have such a talented team, and they are also so well coached. They play so unselfish that it's like I can't see anybody knocking them off, honestly.
Yeah, neither can I.
All right, so that's the NBA. So we probably won't talk about any more NBA till next season starts. We're going to talk about in a few weeks when we have the NBA draft. We'll do a little bit of a draft discussion. And my son said he's going to come on. I know I've said it before. But this time he said he's going to come on to do some NBA draft talk.
The listeners are clamoring for your son.
They're clamoring, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
We get so much email about that.
Tons. No.
Hi there. Skip and Josh will be right back. To get in touch with them, you can send them an email to skipandjoshshow@gmail.com. You can follow them on Twitter @skipandjosh, and you can visit their website at www.skipandjosh.com. And now, back to the show.
Another champion was crowned this week. We've already gone over the NBA, and now we're going to delve into Canada's big sport, which is the NHL.
And it's funny that you call it Canada's big sport because no Canadian teams were in the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, it's true, but I mean, it's still like preoccupies all the Canadian airwaves, radio shows, TV shows. Hockey is like I don't think our American listeners can kind of comprehend the coverage hockey gets here. It's to me, it's the same as what the NFL gets. It's what the NFL gets in the United States. It's like it's 12 months a year hockey coverage, no matter what's going on, right? So
right. What happens is, so in the States, people in Pittsburgh will follow till the end because they made it to the finals, and people in Nashville will do the same. But the rest of the country probably doesn't care, and there are more viewers in Canada watching two American teams.
This is true.
Than there are in the rest of the states, other than Pittsburgh and Nashville.
And it's true because Nashville's such a small market media-wise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, what do you think about the whole Stanley Cup final? You know, as a whole, like, are you happy about the Penguins? Like, how do you feel about them winning 2 years in a row? Like, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, there are some teams that I hate and then some teams that I like. So I don't hate either of the teams that were in the final this year. I'm in a way, I'm glad that Pittsburgh won because people have been talking about Sidney Crosby being the best player in the league for the last 5 or 10 years. And yet, up until now, he only had one Stanley Cup. I mean, the last 12 months have been fantastic for him. The last 13 months, whatever you want to call it. Have been fantastic for him because he's won 2 Stanley Cups. He won a World Cup. And, of course, we know about the gold medal, which was a few years ago.
And the Conn Smythe twice.
Right, Conn Smythe twice. So now you can legitimately say that Sidney Crosby's the best player in the league because of what he's done in the last 13 months. But before that, I don't know if you could say that because he had a lot of injuries. He missed a lot of games. The Penguins didn't even make it to the finals quite, that often. So I'm not thrilled. I'm not upset. Good for them. Good for the Penguins for winning it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Nashville had a great run, a Cinderella story, clearly. And the good thing for Nashville is their team is, for the most part, young. And so they should be very competitive next year and the year after and the year after that. Of course, you never know with injuries and things like that. So things happen. But I don't think they have anything to be ashamed of because they had a great run. And, they have a lot to build on. Even if you look at any of the great teams like the Edmonton Oilers or the New York Islanders and teams like that, they all lost before they won.
Right.
So Nashville's kind of in that same situation.
But it's so competitive in the West, right? Like, and in the East too, but it's so competitive. It's hard. It's hard enough to make the playoffs, and it's hard to go far, right? So
it is. But one thing about the NHL, which is different than the NBA, the NBA, people were saying a year ago that Cleveland and Golden State were going to face each other in the final again, and they did.
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell me today who's going to be in the Stanley Cup final next year.
It's impossible.
You can't.
Yeah.
And if you get it right, it's a lucky guess.
No, go to Vegas and try to bet, but you'll never win. It's too hard.
So, because you never know in the NHL. For example, Chicago, they lost in the first round. And a 16 seed, Nashville, they went all the way to the final.
Right. So
you never know what's going to happen in the NHL.
I'm glad that we finally saw a good game in the final game. Like, all the rest of this series has been, one team dominating the other with big scores, right? So we had a one, well, I guess it was 2-0 because they scored into an empty net at the end, but we had basically a 1-0 game the whole way. So that was exciting. I know you wanted me to mention the disallowed goal. You have a strong feeling about the disallowed goal?
Well, maybe I don't understand the rules in the NHL, but
I don't think anybody understands any of the rules in the NHL.
That disallowed goal was clearly a goal. I mean, yes, the whistle was blown, but there are 3 other officials on the ice who had a good view of the play. Right. I don't understand. Can they not consult with each other and overrule each other, or can they not go to video replay and see that it was a legitimate goal? I don't even think you would have had such a strong argument from the Penguins or Mike Sullivan if that goal did count, because I'm pretty sure they even thought, oh, that's a goal. Now, so it would have been 1-0, early in the second period. It would have changed things a little bit. I'm not saying Nashville would have ended up winning the game, but you play differently when you have a lead. And of course, the Penguins would have played differently because they were behind. So you never know. The final score in the game could have ended up being 2-0 Nashville with them scoring the empty netter.
Honestly, I don't know what the rules are anymore for half the things. I don't know what the rules are for plays like this. I don't know what the rules are for offside. I don't know what the rules are for goalie interference. That's the worst one. So, like, the NHL has some work ahead of them, I think, in terms of consistency of the application of the rules. Because if we don't know, I don't think the players know. I don't think it's fair to anybody that no one knows like how the games are going to be officiated, what they can and can't do.
One thing I will say, I don't disagree with you, and they'll modify the rules or modify the interpretation of the rules. But one thing I will say is, at least the NHL is progressive, and they change their rules when they see a need to change the rules.
They do,
and they're relatively quick in doing it. Some leagues like baseball, they're so slow; it takes them years to do things. And football as well. They how
football
often
changes. Football changes the rules. There's a rules committee every year, and they meet and they modify what's a pass interference. And usually, at the beginning of the year, they say, like for instance, this year in the NFL, you saw it. It's like the refs were all of a sudden calling a lot of this defensive holding instead of calling pass interference, because clearly it was a directive from the league, right? So the NHL does a lot of that. Yes, they are out in front, but I found in the playoffs it was just so inconsistent. I don't think anybody knew what was going on.
There was a lot of clutching and grabbing and holding in the playoffs. There's no question about it. And a lot of things that would have been penalties during the regular season were not called during the playoffs. But, I mean, there was still the drama of, who's going to win and who's going to lose.
Oh, of course.
And there weren't very many sweeps. I know that Nashville swept Chicago in the first round. I can't think of any other sweeps in the entire playoffs. Maybe I'm wrong.
We had so many overtime games. It was crazy.
Yeah,
I can't believe there was no overtime games in the final, but throughout the playoffs, the overtimes were going wild.
So there was still drama.
Yeah. So more on the NHL. I'm going to keep asking you more questions if you don't mind.
Please.
Why do you think that Crosby doesn't get like all the respect he deserves? I see online and everything. He has so many haters. So many people can't stand this guy.
I think it has to do with early in his career, not so much now, but early in his career, he was a bit of a whiner. He would complain to the refs about certain calls or non-calls. And so, once you're labeled as a certain thing, people don't forget that. Yeah. Everything lasts, especially in this day and age with the internet, everything is forever now.
Yeah.
Once it's there, people can go back and look at it, even if it happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it is. So I think that has something to do with it. It's unfortunate. And the truth of the matter is, he may have been whining and complaining, when he was a rookie or second or third year.
So do a lot of players, though.
But he is the captain of the team, and part of the job is to go to the referee and plead your case.
Right.
Now, there's more than one way to do that. And I really, to be honest, I never heard what he said to a referee. You can see his lips moving and you can assume what he's saying, but you don't know for sure what he's saying.
Right.
So maybe he gets a bad rap for that. Listen, there are many other athletes out there who have a lot more things to worry about than being whiners or complainers.
Yeah.
So as far as athletes go, I have no problem with Sidney Crosby.
Me too. I have nothing but respect for him. Do you agree with him as being? You asked me if I agreed with Durant being the MVP. Do you agree with Crosby being the Conn Smythe winner?
I do, and I'll tell you why.
I think I agree with it. Yeah.
If for example, Marc-Andre Fleury had played all 16 wins, or if Matt Murray had played for all 16 wins, then you could make a case that one of them should have been the MVP.
Right.
But because they split it, and I don't think I ever recall in my lifetime of watching hockey where a team has used two different goalies.
Well, there's been times where teams have used, certainly I would say many Stanley Cup winners have used two different goalies, but we're talking about for like one game.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm talking about here, you had Fleury who played 2.5 series and Murray who played 1.5 series.
Right, it's kind of crazy,
and
right?
I don't think that's ever happened before.
No,
and so
I
because
can't think about it.
neither of them played for, the full playoffs.
Right.
I don't think you can give it to either of them unless you wanted to have them split it, which I don't think is even allowed.
Well, I've never seen a split Conn Smythe. Have you? I don't think so.
No, I haven't.
No.
I haven't.
But I if they would have given it to Murray Fleury, I would have said okay.
Yeah, if they would have given it to both of them, sure.
I wouldn't have. But Crosby deserved it. He
Right,
played a great playoff. He led the playoffs in scoring, dominated the finals.
And the truth is, the Penguins did have quite a few injuries, even going into the playoffs, and then as they went on. So they weren't even playing with their A lineup.
Remember our playoff preview, all like back 6 weeks ago or whenever it was.
Yeah.
We both said we didn't know if the Penguins could go far without Letang.
Right. And clearly now they've demonstrated, and they've demonstrated two things, actually. You don't need an all-star defenseman to win the Stanley Cup.
Well, they had Ron Hainsey. That's all they needed.
Right. And you also don't need, and I'm not taking anything away from Murray or Fleury, but you don't need to have the best goalie in the league to win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, you need to have a good goalie.
You need to have a good goalie.
Yeah.
So
I agree with
so there's two things that have been demonstrated there.
Right.
Now,
What do you
how
go
do
ahead.
I'm asking you a question here.
Oh.
How do you think the Toronto Maple Leafs feel having gotten rid of Phil Kessel and now he wins 2 Stanley Cups?
Look,
You don't really have to answer that question. It's more of a rhetorical question. It's just
yeah,
quite funny.
I get it, but there's a lot of teams make bad moves. But the unfortunate thing about Phil Kessel, and it's not just the Leafs organization, it's all of the crazy media in Toronto. And the crazy media in Toronto is just as crazy as the crazy media here in Montreal, right? They ran Kessel out of town.
Yeah.
They ran this guy out of town. They couldn't get rid of him
Dion
fast
Phaneuf.
enough. And Dion Phaneuf. And Dion Phaneuf had a great playoff for Ottawa, right?
Yeah.
So they ran him out of town, and it was unfortunate because me and you have both said, Phil Kessel, he's the 3rd best player on Pittsburgh. This guy would be the best player on just about, 75% of the teams in the league.
Teams in the league.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe not the best player, but let's say the best forward, right?
Yeah.
100% he's the best forward on most teams in the league. The guy is an incredibly talented player.
Now, in the Maple Leafs defense, Phil Kessel goes to the Pittsburgh Penguins, so he's not on the number 1 line. He's not the focus of the opponent's top defensive forward. So he's playing on the 2nd line. He's sort of under the radar, and he can, get away with more things.
Yes, it's true, but talent is talent. You can never have too much talent. And if you have a player like Phil Kessel, you need to find a way to make it work. And I think the Leafs regime that's there now and in place, they're seeing things a little bit different than when Kessel was there, right? And maybe they're being more patient, and maybe when they got rid of Kessel, they're like, okay, we're going to reboot, and that's basically what they did, right?
Listen, I don't think they regret it because the Leafs are a good young team and they're on the rise.
Yeah.
So I don't think they regret it, but it's just interesting. And I mean another similar thing with Dion Phaneuf, although he didn't actually win the cup, but the team that he's on did have a good run.
Yeah, he played for them. Yeah. What do you think about Subban and all the attention that he gets?
So you got to take the good with the bad with PK Subban. So as you were mentioning on our last episode, you're one of the people in Montreal who was in the Subban camp and maybe didn't like the trade for Shea Weber and thought that he was a good player to have on your team and never did anything wrong.
Yeah.
And then of course the whole Listerine incident that sort of soured you to Subban
a little bit.
And that's fine. That's fine. And you talk to 100 people and you'll get maybe 100 different opinions. You'll have half of them probably that are with him and half of them that are not with him.
Right.
One thing though that his antics are good for is that after Nashville had lost games 1 and 2, there was a lot of pressure on Pekka Rinne, and there was even talk that he might not start game 3.
Yeah.
And all kinds of things.
I know where you're going with this. Yeah.
What Subban did by taking the attention away from maybe their poor play in games 1 and 2, he creates this whole thing with the mouthwash and stuff, and so now people are talking about that instead of can Pekka Rinne stop a beach ball.
Right. So maybe it worked for their advantage, right? He came out and said we're confident and we think we're still going to win this series, and they did win the next 2 games at home, right?
Yeah, and I have no problem with Subban or any player saying we're going to win next game because I think every player, every professional athlete in every sport, I think they think they're going to win every single game they play going into that game.
Right.
If they thought they were going to lose, then
wouldn't
why
play.
are they playing?
Yeah.
So whether you're down 3-0 in the series or it's tied 2-2 or whatever it is, you're always optimistic about your own team.
Look, I've seen a change in Subban. Anybody who watches him play now for Nashville can see he's playing a much less flashier game than he played in Montreal. All the spinning, it's flashy. That's his nature. That's the way he plays. You can't change him. But he's a little bit more in control of his game. And I always said that the best PK Subban was the Subban that let the game come to him, as opposed to trying to make something happen every single time he touches the puck and trying so hard, right? So I did see a lot of maturity in the way he plays the game. And I also, up until the Listerine business, I saw a lot of maturity in the way he conducts himself off the ice. So I think he's still, I mean, look, he's not a young player anymore. He's kind of in his prime. But I still think he's going to mature some more. You know, I think there's room to grow still for him. He'll always be a flashy player. He's always going to be the center of attention because he wants to be the center of attention. That's the way he is, right? And you have to either accept it or not.
So PK Subban and Phil Kessel have a few things in common. So in Montreal, PK Subban was the guy.
Yeah.
You know, him along with Carey Price and Max Pacioretty.
Yeah.
They were the guys, and Subban was the number one defenseman on the team, and he had to carry a huge load.
Yeah.
He goes to Nashville, where they have an amazing defense core.
Yeah, he just blends in.
And he might be the fourth best defenseman on that team. Not because he's bad, just because they have such good defensemen.
I still think he's the most talented defenseman on their team, but they play like 3-4 guys all like a lot of minutes, right? No one dominates, you know?
Yeah. So I mean, again, so he doesn't have to be the number one guy in Nashville, similar to Kessel not having to be the number one guy in Pittsburgh.
Right.
So that allows him to, you know, maybe be a little bit more creative, or maybe he'll be a little bit more relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
And so he might not take as many chances because he doesn't feel like, oh, you know, if I don't score now, we're going to lose this game.
Right.
You know, he can play a more conservative game.
The Skip and Josh Sports Show is back.
What are you looking forward to, changing the subject a little bit, just looking forward to like the off season and the coming season? What do you see happening in the league, you know, in terms of the expansion draft and the free agent, July 1st free agency and the actual entry draft? Like, do you think there's going to be any big moves, any big shakeups, Ovechkin moving, anything like?
Well, I don't think Ovechkin's going anywhere anytime soon. And if the Capitals deal him, they're foolish. But I mean, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, you can't tell me who's going to be in the Stanley Cup final next year. And you like, that's every year. Now, even more so with the expansion draft happening, there's going to be at least one guy on every team who's gone.
Right.
So, and they're not getting another player in return. So
right.
Every team's going to lose a player and not get a player in return.
But I think some teams are looking forward to losing a player. Like, for instance, I think in Montreal, they're hoping that maybe Las Vegas is going to take a contract off there. They're going to leave Plekanec and Emelin unprotected, I believe. And I think they're hoping that maybe one of these guys is going to get snapped up, so they won't have to pay them.
So if Vegas does select players with big contracts, if they do that, then the team that loses that player now has some salary cap space. And so they can maybe make some moves.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. I don't think losing a player necessarily is bad. You know,
it might not be bad, but the point being that next year is going to be completely different.
Yeah.
You know, also you're going to have all these teams playing against Las Vegas, and I can't see Las Vegas being competitive next year. There's nothing that tells me that they're going to be a competitive team.
It's impossible.
And so the teams that get to play them the most, that's a few extra wins right there, you know, in your pocket.
Especially in the West, right?
Especially in the
Pacific
West.
Division, or wherever the elite division they're going to play in.
So, you know, I mean, the West is already, I think, the more powerful conference.
It's just a different style. I don't think it's necessarily better, to be honest. I just think it's a different style. I think there's a lot more skill in the East. You have Crosby, Ovechkin, Kessel, Malkin, Carlson. Like, it's loaded with stars, right?
It is. And I mean, look, when you have the All-Star game, you've got All-Stars on both, you know, in both conferences.
Yeah.
You know, and if you put together an All-Star team of each conference, there's no way you can say, oh, this one's much better than that one.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the West is much more physical. I think it has the reputation, and I think it's just much more physical in terms of the style of play, like with a lot of big bruising players, you know.
I want to touch on something else. We didn't even talk about the game-winning goal in the last game of the final.
Well, I mean, it was just a fluke.
Right, exactly. It's like, of all the ways to lose a game, it bounces off the boards, then it hits the back of the net, and he bats it out of midair, like backhand, I think, and it hits Pecorini's back and goes in. So Rinne was playing a phenomenal game.
But what have I said at least 5 times during when we've done episodes during the playoffs? You know how games are won in the Stanley Cup playoffs? It's random bounces.
Yeah.
It's weird bounces. That's how a lot of goals are scored. You got to work for your luck, and you got to hope that you get a few bounces that go your way.
Right, but I mean, in the first 5 games of the Stanley Cup final, there wasn't a lot of that. There was usually
wasn't.
one team that was more dominant than the other.
Yes.
In the last game, it was a lucky bounce. It was a lucky bounce and a bad call by a referee.
Call. Yeah.
So, not the
I
best
wonder
way to
if,
lose.
like, do you think, like, the people in Nashville are going to think of that, like, disallowed goal as much as Sabres fans talk about, like, toe in the crease?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask if they were going to think about that as much as the Music City.
The Music City Miracle.
Yeah, that one.
Maybe, maybe. Yeah. Well, that was in their favor, So
Yes.
yeah. So I don't know. I think Nashville just became a hockey city, so I think it's good for the NHL, right?
Yeah, listen, it's not a bad thing. I like to see different teams in the finals year after year. And getting back to what I alluded to earlier, Pittsburgh's won 2 cups in a row. I wouldn't be surprised if they get eliminated in the first round of the playoffs next year.
Or maybe
that wouldn't shock me.
Or maybe Crosby gets a concussion and Malkin gets injured and they don't even make the playoffs. Anything could happen.
I hope that doesn't happen.
No, I hope it doesn't happen too. But I'm just my point being, anything could happen, right?
Anything could happen.
Yeah. There's one thing I wanted to talk about during the Stanley Cup presentation.
Oh, I'm glad you brought this up because if you didn't, I was going to.
Well, you don't know what I'm going to say.
I think I know, but go ahead.
So, Bettman gets booed all the time.
Gary Bettman, I have to stop you for a minute. Sit back and relax. Gary Bettman gets booed more than any other commissioner. People hate Roger Goodell, but
Yeah.
Gary Bettman gets booed 1,000 times more than Roger
But
Goodell.
I appreciate how he kind of owns it now, right? He knows he's going to get booed, and he just kind of rolls with it, right?
What I don't get is he should get booed in Canada. There's no question because
This is what I wanted to say.
Whatever he says, he does not care about Canada. I don't care what he says
But
publicly.
they should
he
not
doesn't
boo
care.
him in Nashville.
But in Nashville and in pretty much any American city, he shouldn't get booed. Like he's done nothing wrong to Nashville. So I don't get it. I mean, I would boo him. I would boo him at the top of my lungs if I had the chance.
Yeah.
But I don't know what he did to the people in Nashville.
There's only hockey in Nashville because of him.
Yeah, I know.
Right? He stuck by that team. He's the one that said, let's put a team in Nashville, and everybody thought he was crazy. Yeah. Right? So they should be cheering him, not booing him. I didn't like that. I thought it was that's typical fans. Oh, what do? We boo Bettman. Okay, let's boo him.
I wonder if it would have been any different if Nashville had won the cup.
They would have booed him for sure.
Or if the cup was being presented in Pittsburgh. I don't know.
It's like Bettman walks around with a sign on his back that says "Boo me."
Yeah.
Right?
For sure.
It's there. It's there all the time. So I posted a link on our website today. You should go check it out.
Okay.
It's Crosby bringing the cup in through the back of the arena into the Penguins dressing room.
What?
Yeah. It's taken by like a reporter. No, like it's like after they took the cup off the ice and he's bringing it into the dressing room. And they're about to like spray everybody with champagne, right?
Okay.
But you see him going through like the back of the arena, like inside the hallways and the back out, the corridors and whatever. And he's making his way, and it's taken by like a reporter who was there. He took it on his phone and he posted it on his Twitter. So the cool thing about it is, so there's Crosby and he's holding the Stanley Cup and he's coming in and he asked like one of the girls, is there music playing in the room? And she's like, yeah, the music's on. And like, you just get like a little bit of like reality, in the situation. Then he gets close to the dressing room and you could hear it's getting louder. And there's like a crowd of reporters all around. And what does Crosby do? The quintessential Canadian. Excuse me, sir. Could I just get by? Here he is, the captain of the Penguins, just won his second Conn Smythe in a row, second Stanley Cup in a row, holding the Stanley Cup trophy, and they don't realize he's right behind him holding the trophy because they're all looking into the room, and he's there saying, excuse me, could I get by? He says it twice. You have to watch it. It's hysterical. And then as soon as he comes into the room, it's like all hell breaks loose, and the champagne starts flying and everything, so check it out. It's very funny.
Here's one thing we haven't talked about.
Yeah.
One thing I love about the NHL. I love the handshake line at the end of every series.
It's the best thing in the world.
Even if I don't care about the two teams, and not just for the final, but for every round, anytime a team has a chance to get eliminated, I make sure to watch the end of that game because I want to see the handshake line.
Me too.
It's something that I actually look forward to watching almost more than the game itself.
The in the NBA, they hug each other, they find each other on the court, but
it's not
every
an
player.
thing.
Every player doesn't hug every player, right? Baseball, they might come out, same thing. Every player doesn't hug every player. Same thing in the NFL. They find each other on the field and the coaches shake hands and whatever. But this is, they have to do it. I mean, I don't know. There's no rule. They don't have to do it. They just do it, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I think they would do it even if they didn't have to do it.
I want to tell you something about the handshake line.
And well, hold on. Let me say something, and then you can chime in.
Sure.
It's amazing to me that you'll play, a 5, 6, 7 game series, and you'll be at each other's throats the entire time, and you'll trash talk, and you'll do this, and you'll body check and everything. And then in the handshake line, it's like you're best friends.
Yeah.
You're like, nice series, way to go, congratulations.
Yeah.
There's only been one incident that I can recall in my lifetime of watching where the animosity spilled over into the handshake line.
Yeah, it was Emelin and
Lucic.
And Lucic.
But actually, it was more Dale Weiss and Lucic.
Yes, Dale Weiss. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, it didn't happen in the line. You just kind of heard about it after, and then it was kind of
it happened during.
It did, but like then after they talked about it, and it was like basically a lot of people were like, "Hey, we shouldn't even talk about this. What happens in the handshake line happens in the handshake line,"
Right.
Yeah, I do love the handshake line, and as a father of a boy who played minor hockey from the age of 5 to 15, every single game that he played, they shook hands.
Yeah,
my son. So that translates into minor hockey and to kids to show it really brings out the sportsmanship, because no matter how much you hate those kids on the other team and no matter how much you couldn't stand them, you're gonna shake hands with them.
So I want to say one more thing about hockey.
Mm-hmm.
And I meant to ask you this a week ago, and it would have been a more timely question a week ago than it is today.
Sure.
So we talked a lot about, Phil Kessel, PK Subban, Sidney Crosby, you name it. One thing I forgot to ask you was, so if you can put yourself in the mindset of a week ago when, let's say, the Nashville Predators were tied 2-2 with the Pittsburgh Penguins, how do you think Shea Weber felt at that moment?
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a ridiculous question, no? Because
it is ridiculous, but I mean, think about it. Put yourself in his shoes. He leaves the team, not voluntarily. They traded him.
Yeah.
And now the team goes all the way to the Stanley Cup final, 2 games away from winning it.
Yeah.
It
doesn't look good for him because it makes it look like he couldn't bring the team, and now they finally made it without him.
Right.
And but like you said, circumstances. No, I know you're not. But like circumstances are circumstances. Like it takes a lot. It takes a lot of lucky bounces. It takes a lot of weird plays. It takes a lot of different things to make it as far as they did, right? And like you said, they may not ever replicate it again. But I bet you, knowing Shea Weber, I'm sure he was cheering for Nashville. Because I bet you he has a lot of great friends on that team.
Okay.
And you these guys are professional athletes, and I'm sure he wanted I'm sure he has good friends on that team. Can we agree on that? Right. I mean,
I'm sure he does. I'm sure he does.
So I'm sure he wanted his friends to win. But yeah, it is weird.
It's just interesting.
Yeah. All right, so that puts, like you said, a bow on the seasons.
Yes, it does.
So we won't be talking about the NBA playoffs anymore, or the NBA playoffs like we have for the last 2 months.
Well, we're still going to talk about hockey and basketball because both leagues have their draft next week, and
we have the drafts coming up, and we have the free agency,
and both teams and both leagues are going to announce their end of season awards.
Right. So we're definitely going to touch on all the goings on in the off season, but maybe not as in depth as we have been. And we're probably going to get into a little bit more baseball as the summer goes. And we talked off air, but we could reveal this to the listeners.
I don't think we should reveal it now.
Oh no, but
we're
gonna talk about some non-sport stuff during the summer, and kind of change the topics from week to week, and you never know what kind of random nonsense we might talk about.
Right.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. So I don't know when our next episode will be, but maybe it'll be in person when you're here in Montreal.
I hope so. I mean, I will be there, and I hope we get to record in person while I'm there at least once.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. All right. Great talking to you. And again, congratulations to the Warriors and to the Penguins.
Yeah.
Yep. Speak to you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
The Skip and Josh Sports Show is over now. Don't worry, there'll be another episode soon.